The clinking of silverware against fine china was a discordant symphony, 100 tiny hammers against an anvil of tension. It was my birthday, and the grand dining hall of my parents' estate was filled with the sprawling, boisterous entity that was my extended family. 100 relatives, a veritable sea of faces, some familiar, some I hadn't seen in a decade, all gathered for what my mother had called, with a saccharine smile, an unforgettable celebration. I sat at the center of the head table, a guest of honor on my own execution block. My father, patriarch of the Sinclair dynasty, tapped his crystal glass with a fork. The room fell silent, 100 conversations dying in an instant. He stood, his shadow stretching long across the damask tablecloths. He wasn't looking at me, but at the assembled crowd, a king addressing his court. "Family," he began, his voice resonating with practiced authority. "We are here tonight to celebrate a milestone, but also to correct a course." He gestured vaguely in my direction, a flick of the wrist that was more dismissal than acknowledgement. "My son, Alex," he said, and the way he said son was like he was describing a distasteful growth he'd had removed. "Alex has, for years, chosen a path of digital trivialities. He hides in his rooms with his computers, his networks, his systems. He has refused every opportunity to take his rightful place in the family business, to embrace the legacy we have built." His eyes finally met mine, and they were as cold and hard as the diamonds on my mother's wrist. My mother, seated beside him, gave a slight, affirming nod, her lips pressed into a thin, disappointed line. She was the one who had orchestrated this. She had spent weeks on the phone, her voice a syrupy weapon, inviting every cousin, aunt, and uncle, spinning a tale of a grand announcement. She had built this stage for my public immolation. My cousin Julian, a man whose primary skill was wearing expensive suits and nodding at my father, smirked from a nearby table. He snapped his fingers at a waiter, a gesture of pure, unadulterated entitlement that always set my teeth on edge. "More wine," he commanded, without even looking at the server. That gesture was the key to their world. A world where service was expected, where the complex machinery that kept their lives running was invisible and unappreciated. They had no idea that the very network allowing Julian to seamlessly post a smug photo of this dinner to his social media, the climate control keeping this cavernous room at a perfect 72 degrees, the security systems that monitored the sprawling estate, and the financial backend that processed the transactions for their global business, were all running on a bespoke, intricate ecosystem of my own design. I was not just the tech-savvy son. I was the architect. I was the administrator. I was the god in their machine. My father continued his speech, his voice rising in manufactured indignation. "He has been a disappointment. He has refused to marry the woman we chose for him, a woman who would have solidified a crucial business alliance. He has shown no respect for our traditions, for our name. He lives under this roof, enjoys the fruits of our labor, but refuses to contribute in any meaningful way." The hypocrisy was breathtaking. The fruits of their labor were harvested, processed, and delivered through the digital orchards I had planted and tended for 15 years, ever since I was a teenager. I had built them an empire of efficiency, a fortress of data security, all while they saw me as a hobbyist playing with toys in the basement. And so, my father's voice boomed, reaching its crescendo. "It is with a heavy heart, but a firm resolve, that we are cutting the rot from the family tree. As of this moment, Alex Sinclair, you are no longer my son. You are disowned. You will leave this house by morning and you will receive nothing from us. The Sinclair name is no longer yours to tarnish." The silence in the room was absolute, a physical weight. 100 pairs of eyes were on me, a mixture of shock, pity, and for some, like Julian, undisguised glee. This was the climax they had all been invited to witness, the public execution of the prodigal son. I felt a strange calm settle over me. There was no anger, no panic, just a quiet, clarifying certainty. My father, in his arrogance, had just handed me the keys to my own liberation, completely oblivious to the fact that I held the keys to his entire kingdom. I let the silence stretch for a moment longer, savoring the dramatic pause. Then I looked directly into the imaginary camera, the one that broadcast the story of our lives to the great audience in the ether. "They say revenge is a dish best served cold," I said in a calm, even voice, a slight smile playing on my lips. but sometimes it's best served digitally, with the click of a mouse. If you want to see an empire of entitlement crumble and a dynasty of delusion implode from the inside out, hit that subscribe button and drop a like. You're not going to want to miss this. I then turned my gaze back to my father, who was staring at me, his face a mask of confusion and rage at my bizarre, out of context monologue. I slowly, deliberately folded my napkin and placed it on the table. I stood up, my chair making a soft scraping sound on the polished marble floor. I didn't say a word. I didn't argue, I didn't plead, I didn't try to explain the colossal mistake he was making. I simply gave a small, polite nod, as if accepting a business proposal. As you wish, I said, my voice barely a whisper, but it carried in the tomb like silence of the room. I turned and walked away from the head table. As I walked past the other tables, I could feel the eyes of my relatives on me. They saw a defeated young man, publicly shamed and cast out. They saw a victory for the patriarch. They misinterpreted my calmness as surrender. What they didn't see, what they couldn't possibly comprehend, was the unsigned service level agreement for the next fiscal year that was sitting in my briefcase, back in my room. The agreement that legally outlined my duties and the family's access to the digital infrastructure I owned and operated. The agreement that was now null and void. I walked out of the dining hall, the doors closing behind me with a soft, definitive click, sealing them in their bubble of ignorance. The applause started as I reached the grand staircase, a smattering of claps that grew into a wave of support for my father's decisive action. They were applauding their own demise. My lair, as my younger sister used to call it, was in the west wing of the estate, a section they had long since abandoned to my trivialities. It was a suite of rooms that I had converted into a state of the art command center. The main room was dominated by a circular desk with a bank of 6 monitors, their soft glow illuminating racks of humming servers that lined the walls. This wasn't a child's playroom. It was the brain of the Sinclair empire. It was from here that I managed the family's interconnected world. I sat down in my ergonomic chair, the familiar hum of the servers a comforting chorus. My heart wasn't pounding. My hands were steady. This wasn't an act of emotional sabotage. It was a professional, systematic adherence to the terms of my termination. My father had publicly declared me not a son. My mother had organized the forum for this declaration. The family had applauded it. The familial contract was broken. Therefore, all uncontracted, familial amenities were now subject to review. I pulled up the primary administration console, a program I had coded myself, nicknamed Cerberus. It was the gatekeeper to every digital service the Sinclair family and their businesses used. My fingers danced across the keyboard, the clicks echoing in the silent room. This was not revenge. This was simply rolling back uncontracted privileges. It was a simple matter of changing account statuses from family, admin to external no contract. First, the small things. The invisible comforts they took for granted. Step 1, revert all residential network privileges to guest status. In the main house, 57 interconnected smart devices suddenly dropped off the priority network. The 80K television in the den, currently streaming a sports game for a group of my uncles, would buffer, then downgrade to a grainy 480p. My mother's tablet, which she used to browse high-fashion websites, would now load pages at a snail's pace. The multi-room sound system would stutter and fall silent. It was a minor inconvenience, a digital pebble in their shoe, but it was a start. Step 2. Revoke all personalized access credentials to the estate's integrated systems. My father prided himself on his smart home. He loved to show off how he could adjust the lighting, the thermostat, and the security cameras from his phone. I navigated to the user access control panel. My father's profile, Patriarch 1, glowed on the screen. I selected it and clicked to deactivate. His phone would now be just a phone. The app he used to control his little kingdom would return a simple, unhelpful error. User not authorized. I did the same for my mother, for Julian, for my aunts and uncles who lived in the various other properties on the estate, all of which were tied into the central system. The cascade of deactivations was a thing of beauty, a silent, digital coup. Step 3, the big one. This was the move that would graduate from inconvenience to crisis. The crown jewel of the Sinclair business empire, Sinclair Global Imports, ran on a proprietary logistics and finance platform. This platform, codenamed Helios, was my masterpiece. It tracked thousands of shipments, managed millions of dollars in transactions, and provided real-time analytics that gave them a significant edge over their competitors. Helios was hosted not on some third-party cloud like AWS or Azure, which would have been prohibitively expensive and less secure, but on my private, high-performance server cluster right here in this room. My father had terminated my services. Therefore, the company was no longer entitled to use my private hardware. I opened a new terminal window and began drafting an email. It was addressed to the Chief Technology Officer of Sinclair Global Imports, a man named Arthur Gable, a competent but unimaginative executive who reported directly to my father. The email was polite, professional, and utterly devastating. It read, "Dear Mr. Gable, please be advised that as of 10:00 p.m. this evening, the informal hosting agreement for the Helios platform and its associated data has been terminated. As per my standard off-boarding protocol for non-contracted entities, a full data migration process will be initiated. A snapshot of the entire Helios database will be transferred to a standard commercial cloud server. The credentials for this new server will be forwarded to you upon completion of the transfer, which is estimated to take between 48 to 72 hours. Please be aware that during this migration period, the Helios platform will be entirely offline. Following the migration, you will be responsible for all future hosting costs and server maintenance. Sincerely, Alex." I hit send. The consequences of this email would unfold like a slow-motion car crash. Offline for 48 to 72 hours was a death sentence for a global logistics company. It meant no new orders could be processed. No shipments could be tracked. No financial reports could be generated. Every hour of downtime would cost the company millions. The chaos began subtly. The first sign was a text message from my younger sister, Clara, the only one who had looked at me with something resembling horror, not glee, during the dinner. Her text read, "Alex, what's wrong with the Wi-Fi? Mom is freaking out." I didn't reply. An hour later, a frantic email from Arthur Gable landed in my inbox. Its subject line was in all caps, "Argent. Helios Palthafo RMWN." I archived it without reading. The next morning, as I packed my last few belongings, my father's roar echoed through the house. I heard him bellowing my name, a sound I had not heard in years. I calmly zipped up my suitcase and walked out of my room. He met me at the top of the stairs, his face purple with rage. "What did you do?" he snarled. His expensive, custom-tailored suit was rumpled. He looked like he hadn't slept. "I did exactly what you asked," I replied calmly, continuing my descent down the stairs. "I am no longer part of this family. Therefore, I am no longer providing the pro bono services I once did. My professional services require a contract and payment, neither of which I have received." "The business," he sputtered. "The entire network is down. Arthur says you're moving the servers. You can't do that." "I can, and I have," I said, reaching the bottom of the staircase. I looked at him, standing on the landing above me, a king on a collapsing throne. "The hardware is mine. The software is mine. You terminated my connection to this family, and with it, your access to my assets. It's a simple matter of cause and effect." My mother appeared behind him, her face pale. "Alex, please," she said, her voice trembling. The syrupy sweetness was gone, replaced by a raw, desperate fear. "Your father was upset. He didn't mean it. You invited 100 people to watch him not mean it," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "You built the stage. You can't be surprised when the play reaches its conclusion." Julian came running from the direction of the office wing. "Uncle, the phones are dead." "Not the landlines, the entire VoIP system for the office. And the freight elevators at the main warehouse are non-responsive. We can't move any of the new inventory." I had forgotten about those. The VoIP system and the elevator controls were routed through my network for security. Another familial amenity that had just been rolled back. The dominoes were falling, faster and faster. My father looked at me, his eyes wide with a dawning, horrified understanding. He finally saw. He wasn't looking at his disappointing son anymore. He was looking at the man who held the light switch to his entire world. And he had just asked that man to leave the room. I walked out the front door without a backward glance. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in escalating panic, which I observed from the comfort of a luxury hotel suite, paid for with my own considerable funds. My phone was a constant barrage of texts and missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize, panicked cousins, frantic business associates. Even the family lawyer, they were all routed to voicemail. The most illuminating updates came from secondary sources. Clara texted me snippets of the chaos. Dad threw a vase against the wall. He's trying to get some emergency IT company, but they said they don't know your system, and it would take weeks to even begin to understand it. Another text. Julian tried to fix the server room. He just turned a bunch of things off and on again. Now the backup generators won't even start. The whole West Wing is dark. I had to chuckle at that. Julian, the finger snapping princeling, trying to navigate a system that was light years beyond his comprehension, was the perfect metaphor for their entire existence. They had no idea how anything worked, only that it was supposed to work for them. The masterstroke, however, was yet to come. The prime payback wasn't just about turning things off. It was about creating something new. Sinclair Global Imports' biggest competitor was a company called Meridian Logistics, run by a sharp, aggressive CEO named Evelyn Reed. For years, Meridian had been trying to match the efficiency of the Helios platform, with little success. They had the capital, but they lacked the bespoke technology. My father's greatest business fear was that Meridian would one day close that technological gap. I was about to close it for them. I had my lawyer draft a proposal. It was a bold one. I would offer Meridian Logistics an exclusive, 10-year licensing deal for a new platform, Helios 2.0. It would be an upgraded, more powerful version of the system my father's company had just lost, hosted on my secure, high-speed servers. It would also come with my personal, the clock administration and ongoing development. I was offering Evelyn Reed the keys to the kingdom, the very engine of her rival's success. We met 2 days later in her sleek, minimalist office overlooking the city. She was a woman who radiated competence. She had read my proposal, and her eyes were alight with a predatory gleam. "This is either the most audacious bluff I've ever seen, or the single greatest strategic opportunity of my career," she said, her voice a low purr. "The Helios platform, that's Sinclair's secret sauce." "I didn't get it," I replied, leaning back in the chair. "I built it. And now, I'm building a better one. The infrastructure that Sinclair was using is now available. I am offering that capacity, and my expertise, to you." We talked for 3 hours. I laid out the architecture, the security protocols, the analytical power of the new system. I didn't mention my family once. This was business. By the end of the meeting, she slid a contract across the table. The numbers in the licensing fee and my personal retainer were staggering. It was a profitable move for me, but more importantly, it was a devastatingly precise blow to Sinclair Global Imports. I was not just taking away their sword, I was handing a sharper, stronger one to their greatest enemy. The final confrontation came a week later. I received a formal request for a meeting from my father's lawyer. It was to be held in a neutral location, the conference room of a prestigious law firm downtown. They were trying to create a sense of control, of formality, but the scent of desperation was palpable. I arrived with my own counsel, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Ms. Albright. On the other side of the long mahogany table sat my father, my mother, and their lawyer. My father looked 10 years older. The arrogant bluster was gone, replaced by a wary, hollowed-out look. My mother looked fragile, her eyes red-rimmed. "Alex," my father began, his voice raspy, "we need to end this." "This game." "This is not a game," I said, my voice calm and measured. "This is the direct and predictable consequence of your actions. I am simply adhering to the new reality you created." Ms. Albright placed a sleek tablet on the table and slid it across to my father's lawyer. "On the screen," she said, her voice crisp, "you will find a summary of the current situation. First, the off-boarding of all Sinclair assets from Mr. Sinclair's private network is complete. The data for the Helios platform has been transferred to a commercial server. The invoice for the migration service, as per standard industry rates, is attached. It comes to $250,000. My mother gasped. My father's face went ashen. 200. He started. "That's outrageous!" "It's the cost of an emergency. No contract data migration of that size and complexity," I said coolly. "You'll find it's quite competitive." "Second," Ms. Albright continued, "the issue of residential services. As your client publicly and formally severed familial ties with my client, all complimentary services have been withdrawn. My client is willing to offer a consultation on how to build a new, independent smart home infrastructure for the estate. His consulting fee is $5,000 per hour, with a 10-hour minimum. My father looked like he was going to be sick. The man who lived in a world of finger, snaps and assumed service was being presented with a bill for the air he breathed. And finally, I said, leaning forward slightly, there is the matter of Helios 2.0. I let the name hang in the air. My father's lawyer, who had been furiously scrolling through the tablet, looked up, his eyes wide. You can't be serious, he whispered. I am, I said. As of yesterday, I have entered into an exclusive, long-term partnership with Meridian Logistics. They now have sole access to my infrastructure and the next generation of my logistics platform. Their systems will be online by the end of the month. They will be faster, more efficient, and more powerful than Sinclair Global Imports ever was. The final nail, the masterstroke. It wasn't just that they had lost their edge, it was that their most feared rival now possessed it. My father finally broke. He slumped in his chair, the fight completely gone from him. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw something other than anger or disappointment in his eyes. I saw fear. And I saw a flicker of something that might have been respect. The kind of respect you have for a predator that has you by the throat. What do you want? He asked, his voice a hoarse whisper. I have what I want, I replied, standing up. A signed contract, professional respect, and peace and quiet. The resolution was swift and brutal. Sinclair Global Imports, unable to compete with the newly supercharged Meridian Logistics, saw its market share plummet. They were forced to downsize, selling off assets to cover their losses. My father, publicly humiliated in the business world, was pushed into a ceremonial chairman emeritus role by the board. Julian, who had proven himself utterly useless in a crisis, was reassigned to a remote, insignificant branch office in what the family despairingly called corporate Siberia. My parents had to sell the estate. It was too expensive to maintain without the integrated systems I had built, and retrofitting it was a multi-million-dollar project they could no longer afford. They moved into a much smaller house, a house with a normal thermostat and a standard internet connection. The new client, Evelyn Reed, was a dream to work with. She was demanding but fair. She respected my expertise and valued my contributions. Our meetings were efficient, our goals were aligned. One day, she stood with me in the new server room I had built for Meridian, an even more advanced version of my old lair. You know, she said, looking at the humming racks of machinery. I never understood how your father could let you go. To have this kind of power at his fingertips and not even see it. Some people are so used to the light, I replied, watching the data flow across the monitors, that they never think to look at the switch. The quiet moves always beat the loud egos. The real power isn't in the throne room, it's in the engine room. It's in knowing where the power truly comes from. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next time.